Welcome to The Impossible, where we empower others to face the impossible, inspire them to be impossible, and motivate them to do the impossible. I'm Matt, and we're back today with my brother, Austin Douglas. How you doing today, sir?
Fantastic. Hello, everyone.
Do you want to open us up with the topic for today?
Oh, absolutely. So today we are talking about the betrayal of comfort. How one can find themselves in a situation of comfort, and I think there are two routes that we can sort of discuss here today. Two situations of where we would find ourselves within comfort. This is a very intense subject, a very deep subject, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds with it in terms of how we can get there, semantics and all that stuff. But what we need to focus on is kind of two regions of how we can end up in comfort. Either one is by allowance, by ignorance, by just sort of ending up there without really being aware of it creeping up on us. And we'll talk about how comfort can creep up on you pretty quickly and rapidly, and the fact that it's always there. And secondly is when you're placed into comfort in terms of maybe like an exterior force, external factor that came upon you. So you're not necessarily in a comfortable situation, as in like, oh, I was just diagnosed with cancer, I can't go work, all this stuff, and I'm going to be going through treatment. That's not necessarily comfortable, but as soon as you come out of that, you find that kind of comfort, like at least for me, and that's something that I can certainly discuss a lot more of. But I found comfort, and it found me, I guess, when coming out of treatment. Yes, I was excited to get back to work, but it was very difficult to do so in terms of a physical and a mental sense, and especially an emotional sense, when I hadn't worked on any of those during treatment and then immediately post-treatment. And so I think we can talk about the two ways of getting into falling into comfort, either by just ignorance or allowing it, and then kind of external factors kind of forcing us into those moments.
Yeah, let's definitely touch on that, because for me, the darkest period of my life was coming out of treatment. It was not during treatment. Mm-hmm. Like I was actually in what I like to tell people, obviously not in the best physical shape of my life, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, I was in really good shape when I was battling cancer. But it's because I had purpose, I had passion, I had drive, I had something worthy to fight for every day. And that was my life. But also more than that, it was fighting for the ability and to send the message of you can do hard things, you can overcome things, you can become impossible. I was using this messaging even back then. And so it's like I was living with that level of passion and purpose in my life, despite, battling cancer, despite, everything horrendous that came with that journey. I was actually in quite good shape. And then it was after treatment when all of a sudden, and there was no transitions of care back then, all of a sudden, all of this meaning and purpose is completely ripped from you, and you have to go back to quote unquote normal day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. Even though there's
nothing normal about that transition.
Yeah, normal does not exist anymore after going through something like that. So it's interesting that we both have these points in our lives where coming out of treatment poses significant challenge. Mm-hmm. And where do you think that comes from, and where does comfort play into all of this?
So when you are going through that suffering, you find purpose within the realm of a daily task that you were having, that you're forced to complete, which, whether like it or not, is a good thing in order to produce that purpose. But the daily task of suffering and trying to survive can ultimately, again, give you that notion of, okay, I have a purpose, I have to survive, I'm going through something extremely difficult, so therefore I have a fight, I have a battle. And this battle, whether it was voluntary or not, and then again, that's a whole nother rabbit hole, but like whether voluntary or not, I have two options. I can either fight this, or I can succumb to the pressure. And we're going to talk about fighting through it, because that transitioning from that, because that's also what I had felt, especially the second relapse was a bit more difficult to battle, quote unquote, when I was down in Houston, because I was by myself. But for the first and the third rounds of treatment, for me at least, it was not difficult, and I definitely, most certainly chose to battle through full steam ahead. And so when you go through that time, when you're traveling through that timetable, that's sort of kind of flowing with the river of motion. Your body's in motion, your mind's in motion, because of those daily tasks happen to be needing to be fulfilled in order to really get out of that. I'll say come out of it alive. And I really do mean that in the figurative and the literal. So then, as you have built up that structure foundationally and then above ground, it's a beautiful home that you've been able to build during that time of suffering. And then when you've worked so hard for maybe a very long time or even a short amount of time, worked hard in that short amount of time even, you come out of it, and again, you don't, unless you have family members or friends that have been through what you've been through or something similar, or have dealt with this in the past, the transition itself can leave you helpless, hopeless, and now meaningless. There really are no transition programs, at least in my experience. And I had the experience of going through treatment, and I mean, one of the most robust clinical researching and frontline hospitals in the United States, let alone the world. And my transition was, well, you're in remission now. You can go back, to work. You can go back home. You're done. Kind of like, I'm sure for some soldiers, it was, in some of those, in the wars back in the day, or even just now, it's just like, okay, well, your job's done. Go home. Yeah. You can get back to that normal life. Yeah.
Well, that's the number one thing you hear from soldiers who come home from war. You sit down and listen to long form podcasts, things like that. People who have battled severe PTSD from wartime conflicts, they say that I was great while I was out battling. It was when I came home and all of a sudden I didn't have a mission.
Yeah.
You get so programmed into chasing that mission, living out that purpose. And when you're battling life or death like you are in war, or you are with cancer diagnosis, there's pretty much no higher level of purpose you're going to find than that.
Than defending your country.
Yeah, with the exception of like battling to save the lives of others. And that's I think particularly in the military setting, when you're fighting to save the lives of those immediately around you, on your team, and then also the lives and morals and principles of everything that your country stands for back home, you're just not going to find a higher level of purpose and meaning. So when you get used to that as your normal, and all of a sudden within a 24-hour period it's stripped from you, it's I could see how that could be incredibly debilitating, similar to how it was for us with the cancer diagnoses. And Viktor Frankl's got that quote of, when man loses all sense of meaning, he distracts himself with pleasure. Yeah. And that, I think, is kind of a perfect corollary to this discussion with comfort, because it's like when we lose that sense of purpose and that meaning and that reason to struggle, that reason to fight, that reason to suffer and endure and do hard things, it becomes very easy to settle into this rhythm of, rather than like immediately recognize, oh, I just need a new purpose, I need a new mission. It becomes very easy to just distract ourselves with pleasure, whatever that may be for the individual.
Because the home that you were building when you were on that mission, when you were serving that purpose, and if you come out of it purposeless, which the majority, at least of the people that I've talked to coming out of cancer remission, there are very few people that I talk to that are like, oh yeah, I came out and I mean, I was, we're all happy to be done, not worrying about surviving. But now it's turned into, but then can we turn that into a thriving situation coming out of that? And the majority of the people don't have that sort of success immediately. And when you've built such a beautiful home over the past 6 months, 9 months, year, 2 years, and then you lose the essence of the battle, you stop taking care of that home and you just sit in it. And you sit there and you're mindlessly wandering. You're pondering, why is this happening to me? Why can't I get out of the house? I don't want to leave. I just want to sit here. The house gets cluttered. And the house here is kind of like what I'm using as a kind of an analogy for the mind itself, kind of your mind palace, I suppose. It can get cluttered very quickly. And we all know that even not within this experience of coming out of cancer treatment, if you're not taking care of yourself, your mind gets cluttered very, very quickly. And that's what gets people, just people in general, really caught up in the moment and really, antsy, anxious, aggressive, whatever you want to call, the overexertion of stress kind of rearing its ugly head out in emotions towards self and or others. The cluttering of this house is just not, it's clearly not productive, and it's not going to get you anywhere but there. It's going to keep you there. In the famous words of Ivan Moody, I'd rather be anywhere than here. Yeah. And you certainly don't want that kind of reaction to it either. But so you're in that house, it's cluttered, and it's hard to move around. It's hard to get thoughts to be completed, and it's very difficult to sort of picture how to get around it, how to get out of the house, and but also how to take care of the house. And that was something that I struggled with mightily after the first round of treatment, especially because that's where the upgrade to Cleveland and everything. It was somewhat difficult. I hit it very well, and then as I kind of inferred to before, to where my second relapse and going to Houston, that was very difficult. Not only because of it was my first relapse and remission. It was a relapse that put me through some pretty heavy treatment, and then I get out of it. During treatment, I'm alone for 5.5 weeks in Houston, a place that I did not want to be, and then I leave Houston, come back here, and I didn't handle all of that leading up to it well. So then once I got back here, I found a lot of comfort. I also relapsed in another manner, and that is where comfort was creeping up. If you're not paying attention, it's going to find you. Comfort was creeping up. And it's a very opportunistic sort of parasite, because it's always there. It's always lingering in the background. Not that it finds you. That's not the case at all. It is always there. That's my bad. It's always there. It's wanting you to lose sight of it, lose awareness of it, so that therefore it can slowly kind of take each step closer to you and take advantage of you in those moments. And to really, once it grabs a hold of you, we all know we have those moments. We have those days, weeks, months, possibly even years of what comfort, of understanding of what comfort can do to you. So coming out of a huge, purposeful time of surviving, in our cases, and then going into trying to get back to a normalcy, like you said, that is just non-existent. It's not there, and losing sight of a purpose and not having help, especially. And I think I think that's something that we could touch on real quick, is just not having the support, maybe not even during the treatment. I mean, it's paramount for during the treatment, and I can speak to that obviously with experience, but then having a very close-knit but also supportive and positive support group and support force behind you coming out of treatment and back into the real world is again, it's paramount. You need that in order to realize that there is a purpose when you're not trying to survive, especially when it's something so malevolent. And that's another key thing about some of the more horrible times that you can go through when you're battling something. Because I mean, there's also just like battling an addiction to Little Debbie's is not necessarily as bad as battling an addiction with alcohol. But you still have to come out of that. You still have to try to transition back to quote unquote normalcy. But once you get back here, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to understand that consistency was something that was required for you to serve that purpose of surviving back when it was something that was maybe an external force coming in. So in this case here, like, we had no option again to be consistent and to be dedicated to not only not allowing the comfort to come in, but we had to be dedicated to the purpose. We had to be consistent. Otherwise, it could have meant our life.
Yeah.
So when you come out of that and you get back into this quote unquote normal period of normal day life, a big misunderstanding is that, oh, well, it just kind of happened back then. And if you don't review the footage, if you don't analyze what actually happened, when you come back out of it, you're not gonna pick up, and you can pick up pretty quick on it if you're willing to be honest with yourself, that it was the consistency that was most certainly the key to it. You had the choice and you made the choice, but that choice was kind of not yours. If you wanted to survive, that you had to be consistent with that dedication, with that with trying to achieve those goals. In this case, in the case before, it was surviving, but now you have to set up your goals. So I guess I want to pass the ball back to you. When you get back into the normalcy and you realize that you have to be consistent towards pursuing impossible goals, how were you able to not just set goals, but to set impossible goals, if that makes sense? Like yes, now I want to survive, but I need to thrive. Yeah. I know what I was able to do coming out of it because I was surrounded by you and we had impossible performance, that I realized that there were impossible things that I needed to pursue. Not just, okay, I'll get back to my job and then, all right, I could probably work out. I might eat pretty good. But, and then you start to slow down and then the mind starts to clutter. So what were you able to do coming out of, not necessarily, I know coming out of that treatment, some things were not positively aligned for you, but down the road, what were things that were, what were some aspects that made you realize that it was impossible goals? They were goals that really put yourself up against the wall to really work hard. What motivated you and what made you realize that that's what you needed to really not only survive, but to thrive post-traumatic event?
Yeah, I think you got it absolutely correct there. And I think one piece before we dive into that, how do you kind of like properly transition? How do you maintain this purpose and meaning as you move from one mission to the next? I think as you were talking there, a lot of it may have to do with how our society is built these days. Because we're still, and I do believe it's getting better, especially this new younger generation that's coming up. I am really motivated by this younger generation that's coming up. They're doing a lot of really cool stuff. They're very dedicated to a strict driven lifestyle. And I think it's because they've seen a lot of the examples of what a life devoted to comfort and sloth can look like. And they're like, I don't want that. to win. I want to live. I want to be driven. I want to be able to run my own mission. I want to be able to chase my own purpose. And I love seeing that in this younger generation that's coming up. But right now we still have a society that is so heavily built on comfort as being the purpose of life. And it's just not. It can't be. You will lose your entire self. You will lose your life. Even if not physically, you will lose it mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And you and I both know people who are in this position right now. More people than we wish were there, but we know people. And I think that's probably a lot of what creates this problem. You get out of cancer therapy something that is, you almost can't help but to have meaning and purpose when you're battling through that, because you are fighting for your life every single day. And like you said, you have to show up with consistency. That line that we used to say, consistent correct action over time. You have to show up with that every day, or it legitimately could cost you your life. So as long as you still have the will to live, you have to show up with that every day. And then it's over. And what does all of society tell you? Oh, you're healthy, you're cured, you should go celebrate, you should enjoy your life, you should do all of these things. Well, no. Our societal understanding, especially 10, 12 years ago, and especially in the past several years that you've been battling, was, oh, celebrating means I go rest, I go relax, I go eat good food, I go chill out and watch TV for a while.
Good as in desserts and sweets, not not nutritious,
not fine food.
Yes.
Fine dining, as we'd call it. So I think it's easy to get in this trap of, oh, it's done, I should go be happy, I should go celebrate, I should go enjoy all of these comforts of life that I didn't get to enjoy while I was on treatment. And certainly those can be good, rewarding things. Go out and have a wonderful meal with family and friends. But don't allow that to propagate to the point that you're sitting in front of the TV night after night, eating 3 different types of fast food that, you had to get this specific combo of what's going to bring the maximum amount of dopamine hit. It's when you're getting sent this message from society of, oh, you should go enjoy comfort now, immediately after having lived a higher purpose than maybe you've ever lived in your life. I know that was certainly my situation. And in my case specifically, I was going off to college. So everybody was like, oh, go enjoy college, go have a lot of fun, go, experience all these new things. And I did that to about the maximum degree that you can. Yeah. So it's like, and then when I was doing that, I was more devoid of purpose and meaning than I've ever been in my life.
It was sitting there fumbling in my head. I'm like, that's because there's a lack of purpose.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And the issue is we start chasing purpose through comfort, and it will never, ever come.
Through pleasure.
Yeah. It will never come that way. And so when you fall into this trap of thinking, oh, this is what I should be doing to make myself happy and to enjoy life right now, and then you don't find it, that can lead to a really negative, dark spiraling circle. And that's what I got into, where everybody in the world was telling me I should be happy, I should be enjoying my life, I should be having a good time, I should be comfortable in all of these things that I'm doing right now, and I should just be happy because I'm alive, my cancer's cured. But then I wasn't. And so then I felt like, oh, there must be something wrong with me, because everybody in the world is telling me I should be happy, and I'm not. In fact, I've never been unhappier in my life. I've never felt more devoid of purpose, never more devoid of meaning, never more without a mission or something to do. And so then I would feel very guilty, like something's wrong with me. And so then I would go back to pleasure and comfort to try to escape that. And then I would feel even more confused about why I'm not unhappy. It just became this vicious cycle. And where I broke out of that was not even necessarily intentional. I got to a point several years into this where I just needed something different. I don't know that I ever had like this true like rock bottom moment of like, this can never happen again, but I was just in the cycle day after day, week after week, and I was just completely sick of it. I was to the point where I didn't want to die, but I was to the point where I felt like my life was so meaningless that it didn't matter anymore if I continued to live. And you know what that's like. It is a horrendous spot to be in. And so I had to do something different. And I had this goal, like when I first came home from having battled cancer, got out of the hospital, I still had a lot of that drive and purpose in my soul. And I remember getting online. I remember this so clearly. Sitting on my parents' couch in our living room days after getting out of the hospital, opening up the laptop and typing in to look and see if anybody had ever run a half marathon on one leg before, because where I was at the time, I was like, there's no way anybody's ever done this before. This would be completely impossible, because I'm still barely able to go 50 feet with the assistance of crutches on a prosthetic leg. Well, I look it up, and of course thousands of people had done it, but I still thought, and I was like, okay, but I still thought, I was like, if I could do this is something that seems totally outside of any realm of potential for me. If I could do this, like, that would be an incredible achievement for my life. And then I got caught in that cycle of comfort and meaninglessness and let it sit on the table for several years. But when I was in that moment several years after cancer therapy, where I was in that dark, vicious cycle, and I got to that point where I was like, I need something different. The thing that got me moving in a better direction was I remembered that goal of running a half marathon. I had started actually working at Nationwide Children's Hospital, so I was seeing a lot of the advertising and promotion for the Columbus Half Marathon and the relationship that the hospital has with the marathon. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to start running again and see where this goes. I started running about when school started, around like mid to end of August. And I ran all the way through October. And I got up to where I think the longest run I'd done was like an 8-mile run before I did my first half, which is honestly adequate if you're not trying to set like a timed PR goal. Yeah. That's plenty adequate. And I show up race day and I complete the half marathon. And that moment at the finish line was where I regained that purpose. I saw that meaning in life again, and my eyes were opened to my own potential, which is exactly why we take so many people to Columbus to run their first marathon, is so that we can help open their eyes to their own potential. And I think that will absolutely happen to anybody who goes out and completes their first half. Because if you've never really ran before, never done any distance running, 13.1 miles seems like a lot of miles. And even to somebody who's been an experienced runner for decades, 13.1 miles is still a lot of miles, if you're pushing yourself hard enough. So I think the key is to recognize when you transition out of something, it doesn't have to be cancer therapy, but whatever it is, you're transitioning out of something where it's insanely difficult, the struggle is at maximum level, and at the same time, you have an unbelievable amount of purpose and meaning in that fight, even if it's not something you enjoy through the process. You have that purpose and meaning, and then you transition out of that. I think we have to realize we are still fighting for our life. We're no longer fighting for the physical ability to stay alive. We actually now have the opportunity to fight for something much greater than that, which is our ability to live at the highest potential we can possibly find. And through like physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual domains. So whatever it is that speaks to your soul, whatever it is that calls to you, that's something you'll have to find and build and create for yourself. But what we have to realize is the purpose of, when you transition out of that, the purpose of your life is not going to be to chase comfort at the highest level, because you didn't have comfort for so long. It's actually going to be to continue to push, and now you have newfound levels of physical energy and mental capacity and all of these areas you didn't have while you were on cancer therapy. So now you can fight for your life at the highest potential. You can create and build and grow and inspire others, and whatever it is that specifically speaks to you and specifically drives you, now you have the opportunity to do this at a higher level than you ever had while you were battling through cancer therapy or whatever the impossible challenge may be. And the shorter of a window we can create between when we are battling the purpose of simply staying alive physically to allowing ourselves to accept the new mission of living to our highest potential, I think the quicker and easier that transition will be.
First of all, yeah, I agree. Love it. But I want to take one step further. I was not before, but I am now. Nowadays, I see it as not only an opportunity that once you transition out of the traumatic event and back into pursuing the impossible, that it's not just an opportunity. It's a requirement.
Yeah.
I absolutely, at first, I absolutely loathe having to go back and put myself in the mindset that I held during treatment. As soon as I put myself into that thought experiment. So what I'll do to see, how can I say that? There are moments that I take on purpose. There is time out of the occasional day that I will take, and I will set back a particular time where I purposefully engage in a thought experiment of, one, putting myself back into the mind of where I was July of 2023, or 2022, sorry. This is about 2 months, 1.5, 2 months into treatment of my first upgrade into Cleveland. So this is my hair's gone. All hair gone. I'm freckled all over. I can't be out in the sun for too long because it hurts the skin, and then the last thing that I need is also the last thing that I wanted to do was also develop skin cancer. My immune system is garbage. I feel horrible, and I don't want to eat anything. I engage in other activities, and ultimately I have an absolute disdain for life. And at first, when I decided that I needed to start taking these experiments, I didn't want to do it. I really did not want to put myself back into that mindset ever again. But there are multiple benefiting factors that come off of it. So first, I'll put myself in the experiment. I'll put myself back into that mindset of where I was in an absolute deeply depressive and ultimately in a state of loathing of life. And then secondly, the second step would be, I say, okay, where can I take myself from here that is ultimately going to be better than where I am now? So I play around with some ideas on something creative I can do, something physical that I can do, something spiritually that I can ponder, or something emotionally that I can tackle. And then thirdly, I write down whatever that, quote unquote plan of action could be. This is not a time for me to necessarily implement something unless it's a really good idea. But I write down what I'm thinking of throughout that experiment. And then fourthly, I will write down just a couple of notes of what I'm thankful for, what I'm grateful for, a reflection of gratitude, I guess you could call it. And ultimately that gives me purpose and meaning for what I'm chasing. Maybe not within the thought experiment itself, but ultimately within life, where I actually am at in reality. Because this experiment that I'll engage in doesn't necessarily, I don't treat it as much as a reality-based moment in time. I definitely extract myself a little bit from what's going on the outside so that I can look inside very, very deeply and without distraction. And so when I come out of that, I can come out and experience the multiple benefits that come from it. One, I'm able to shake off a lot of nonsensical anxiety or anger or, lingering on the edge of depressive, lingering kind of thoughts that I maybe just accumulated over the week. Some of that clutter that's in the house. Mm-hmm. I'm able to sweep a lot of that away. Because it's obviously, life was very, very a few fingers left hanging on the cliff in those moments versus now. And so I'm able to be, that's just one sense of the gratitude. So firstly, I'm able to clutter away some of the anxieties of present time. Secondly, I can watch myself and I get to experience from a somewhat third perspective, an outside perspective, sitting there looking through the glass of into the house and seeing progress be made, visualizing and ultimately, again, experiencing the evolution of my time here on Earth. I'm able to back away from it a little bit, and I achieve this also through meditation. Meditating has gone out a little bit because I'm starting to engage in more of these more open realm, not within this realm, but open realm. I would say thought experiments, because meditation is just purely, that's just a moment for me to get to just be quiet. I don't think much at all in those moments, just to quiet the mind. And so this is more of an open realm. I like to call it an open realm moment versus kind of a closed realm. Let's turn off the lights, shut off the music, and just be free for a moment. But for these open realm experiences, I can see and I get to experience the evolution while looking through the glass at Austin of what had unfolded, accepting what had unfolded, and thus, I will say in this moment, giving myself the opportunity to realize what is potentially or possible, or what is the potential for the future. And so when I finish this experiment, it's been made very, very clear to me that realizing the transition going from battling and surviving to then battling and thriving, I'm not only in the case now of, I have this opportunity, with Matt and a possible performance to change some lives, but ultimately change mine. No, where I look at that now is this is a requirement. It should have been made a requirement when I first came out of it. I just wasn't willing to admit that pursuing the impossible until we had Impossible Performance really going, and you and I had talked about it just for, like we discussed previously, for years coming up to this point now. I needed to admit that it is a requirement for me to perform the duties of impacting as many people as I could in a positive but also reinforcing manner. And that's why I want to make this clarification here, at least from my perspective, is that it's not just an opportunity to go and pursue the impossible. It is a requirement for you to go and to not only pursue the impossible for yourself, but to pursue the impossible and impact those around you and ultimately society, whether that's, a drop in the ocean or creating a tsunami. That's up to you, but it is still a requirement and a duty for you to go and to make that impact. Because a lot of people come out of those situations, or just a lot of people in general who don't go through any type of suffering, make absolutely, they don't create any ripples within that ocean. And that is, I have learned, and I want to state here that is not okay. Yeah. You have a duty and you have a requirement for me, and in this case, to not submit to the comfort. Do not allow that to betray what potential you have, whether it's a drop or a tsunami in that ocean. You have no reason to back away from that and to shy away. You need to attack that full force, no matter in what domain that, not necessarily performance domain as we discussed before, but whatever domain that you deem fit for you to be able to push in and to be motivated to start and keep momentum throughout. It is a requirement for you to find that and to pursue that.
I agree 100%. It's like we say all the time, your potential is your responsibility.
Yes, it's a notion of self-accountability for me, because you have to have a positive part within society. And if you don't have a positive position within society and trying to move it in a direction of good in some manner, I really struggle to see why have a position in society in the first place then. And I'm not insinuating the negative side of maybe how some of you would hear that. But what I'm saying is it is your duty and it is required of you, in my opinion, to push yourself to the highest potential. And that means being a positive, that means being a force for good within your community, family, community, and then society as a whole.
Yeah, and it's not even a requirement like per our standards and per our views.
No.
It's just a general human requirement, because if you are not living, or at least if you are not living in a manner that is chasing your highest potential, you will be a miserable person. Mm-hmm. If you are living a life where your whole purpose is dedicated to finding the highest level of comfort possible, you will not have a happy life. And that will be reflected in your thoughts, your actions, your words, everything about your life. I see it all the time. Even people who may operate under the illusion that they're trying to portray they're trying to portray this persona as if they are happy or they're living a happy life, or they're on social media posting, oh, here's this great vacation we took, but deep inside they have a part of their lives, a big part of their lives, that they're so unhappy with, and they're trying to chase all these things and do all these things because they think they're going to find some level of meaning and purpose in it, and you just aren't. If you are not living in a manner that is pursuing of your potential, pursuing something impossible, something greater than you know yourself to be right now, you will not have true happiness in your life. And that's not our rule. It's just the rule of nature as we've come to find it through our own experience. And that practice that you lay out, that kind of dark mirror reflection of going back to not just some of the most powerful moments of your life, which is something I often do, but specifically those darkest moments of your life, which is something that I've actually not spent very much time doing. And this is something new that I'm going to incorporate into my own life after hearing you talk about this. I spend almost no time reflecting on that darkest period of my life from, 2014 through kind of the tail end of 2017. I spend pretty much no time reflecting on that. And it's not been intentionally, like I've been intentionally avoiding it. I've just never seen, I guess, really much of a reason to go back there. But that practice that you lay out of specifically going back, viewing through the window who that person was, what their actions were, what their feelings and emotion and spirit were like, that is a powerful practice for multiple reasons. First of all, you get to view where you were, and you get a reminder of, this is what I do not want in life. This is where I was miserable. I was living without purpose. I was doing XYZ thing. And it's a reminder to yourself, this is not what I want out of life. Mm-hmm. And so it shows you firsthand what this constant pursuit of making pleasure or making comfort your purpose, what that looks like, and how devoid of meaning that is. But I think actually the stronger point that it provides is it gives deeply intense contrast to who you are now versus who you were at your darkest point. Mm-hmm. And I think that's incredibly empowering for who you are now. Because if you can look back at the darkest point of your life and then look back at who you are now and see, wow, if I had told that person, like if I had told myself in 2015 that we would have this podcast set up, that we would, have the ability to have the production level that we have, that we would be running marathons and half marathons and squatting unbelievable amounts of weight, and just everything that we're pursuing in life, getting to build this mission and this vision, I wouldn't have believed it.
A bold-faced lie.
Yeah. And so then you can take that one step further to project into the future. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure I am living a life today such that 10 years from now, I will be able to do this same practice and look back to where we are today and be able to say, man, if I had told that guy where he would be going in the next 10 years, mm-hmm. he wouldn't have believed it. And I think when you can take the past and use it to empower your present, and then take your present and use it to empower the future, or take the future and use it to even empower the present as well, you almost can't lose with that level of motivation and drive. So I think we're going to have to dive deeper into that process that you lay out, because I think that is an incredibly, incredibly powerful practice, and finding some like structure and a way to implement that in the daily life is going to be huge for anybody pursuing any passion in life.
Well, in a few more factors that are benefiting from it, I just wanted to touch on a couple of more, is that ultimately will form into practices and behavior out in the real world. One especially, a few times I have... Ooh. No. A few times I've looked back to not the Austin that was in the middle of treatment, hoping to not wake up the next day and asking to not wake up the next day. Ridiculous. I sometimes will look not into the mirror. I will look through the glass. That outside perspective is something that I really want to make a forward point here, is because I'm looking through the glass, and I then put into the room whatever Austin, whatever age I was, that's what I put there, and that's what I can set there, and that's what I can observe. So whenever, and I'm going somewhere with this. So when I want to achieve the ability, well, I guess practice and ultimately achieve and continue to work on and allow it to evolve, but to be engaged and to practice the idea of observation before judgment is something that I find so benefiting, especially when I set down Austin through that glass into the room, the Austin that was 10, 12, 14 years old, 16 years old. A very, very, very different person than I am now, for many obvious reasons, but also where I was, aspiration wise, where I was, energy and passion wise, but ultimately towards the acceptance of ignorance and innocence. I look through that glass and ultimately, because it's yourself, I force myself to practice observation first. And when you put observation before judgment, within this experiment and within that open realm, not the current realm of reality that we have, but within the open realm, you can practice it there. You can play around with observation. You learn how to formulate and to construct more constructive questions, I suppose, and more engaging questions, and more and develop this higher precise intention of questioning within your observations, that then, and I have found that when you come out of that and into reality and you've practiced it there, then you practice it within our realm, you really develop this sort of sense of not judging first at all. Not even in the, for a lot of us here or for a lot of people, myself included in the past, who sit there and go, oh, here's this judgment that I pass upon this person, and then you find out that you were incredibly wrong, or wrong in a manner that is, could be one aspect or many aspects, but they're both incredible in their own ways. That you notice very quickly that the manner of, or the ability and the practice and the implementation of observing first, then commit to a rough draft judgment, is something so extremely beneficial that can come from this type of experiment. It really is game changing for you when you get back to our realm. And that, for me, and the reason why that this is important is because observation before judgment is something that's going to be so wildly not only beneficial for you and your psyche, because then you're not so caught up in the clutter of passing judgment upon somebody and just making that your whole day. And then you realize it's 9 p.m. and you got to go to bed and you didn't accomplish a single thing. And I speak of that from experience. But then observing also obviously gives you many, an incredibly large quantitative amount of opportunities to learn from somebody, because you've developed the ability and the skill set to be able to ask not just questions, because not every question is a good question. We should all be very willing to accept that, but to develop that skill set of asking really good questions to where you are not only giving the opportunity for yourself, but for the other person to learn to learn something new. And so that observation before judgment, with putting yourself in a very, not only innocent, but even another word, vulnerable, like put a very vulnerable, in my case, Austin, through that glass, you really go, oh, well, I know how I felt in that moment. I look like this, but I would have immediately passed this judgment before I observed. So thus, I need to just, let's put one more question in before, let's put one more question, two more questions in the observation period before you actually do the judgment period. You have to test your hypothesis before you can come up with a solution to a particular problem. That's just the scientific endeavor. And so you have a hopeful of judgment before, but like you're not going to get to a qualitative judgment until you're done observing. And so that's certainly a very benefiting factor that can come out of this thought experiment. And there was another one as well, and it's kind of escaped me. I went a bit too deep on that one.
Well, I really like what you lay out there, this idea of observation before judgment, and a very, very healthy amount of observation before judgment, I think would be paramount in the majority of cases, because it brings up, in my mind, a fault of my own, and that is that I am extremely hypercritical of my own self, particularly in those years, that darkest period of my life. And it's to the point that I actually allow it to bleed over into my emotions on certain things today. And it's something I need to work on improving. There's me being hypercritical of my own hypercriticalness.
How dare you, Matt? Sorry, Matt. God.
But yeah, so it's when I look back at that period, the main emotion I feel is disgust. Because I look at that and I look at how much potential I was wasting.
That's pretty heavy.
And the life I was living devoid of meaning and purpose. And I hold myself to so much higher of a standard than that now. And so I look back at that time period of my life and I just am disgusted by who I was. But what you propose there is actually, it's very profound in the idea that what if I just looked back at that period and just observed? Not worrying about casting judgment, not worrying about trying to compare him to who I am now, not worried about any of these other things tied to the situation. Just observe. Just view that person and what they were going through. And I can already feel that just the simple thought process of observing those memories I have of that time already fills me with so much more empathy for that person. Because I was living a life devoid of meaning and purpose. I was using pleasure and comfort as a means of escape from all the demons that were haunting me at the time. But at the same time, I was having to live through torment in so many ways. Now, certainly a good deal of it was self-inflicted, but a good deal of it was also a battle I was working through, and the battle that ultimately led to where we are today. And in fact, if I hadn't gone through that period, what we're doing today probably wouldn't have happened. So taking that practice of going back to observe, I think will allow me to have a greater deal of empathy for that person, and from a more practical sense, be able to see what was it that was happening to that person that drove him to these levels. And if I develop a deeper understanding of that, it will allow me to pull pieces into my own life of understanding how not only can I avoid going to that same place in the future, but how can I find a different path to maximize my own potential, my own growth for now. And in addition to that, how can I have more empathy for for people in the same situation today? Because I struggle a lot with the idea of people just going out to a bar and drinking themselves to blackout drunk and just calling that a great Friday night. I struggle a lot with having empathy for people who do that on a regular basis. And in fact, I get filled with some of those same feelings of disgust and frustration of like, why would you do this? Why would you waste this time and this potential and everything that you have at your fingertips right now, that you have access to? And I think I probably need to find a little more empathy in those situations. Because, we talk about how you find meaning and purpose and use that and not allowing that to be driven by comfort and pleasure. And that's still all true. That still all holds. Everything we've discussed here holds absolutely true. But you're not going to help people find meaning and purpose if you view them with a sense of disgust. Without a level of empathy tied to them and tied to that situation, we're not going to help bring them to where we know true happiness, true purpose can be found. So I think that practice of observation before judgment, not only does that work for people we encounter in day-to-day life, just as we discussed with James last week with the lady, like hardcore judging him at a restaurant because he had his girlfriend cut a steak because he's only got one functional arm. Mm-hmm. She didn't take the time to observe. She cast a judgment before she observed. We can't allow ourselves to do that to the people we encounter in day-to-day life, and we especially can't allow ourselves to do that to ourselves in some of our darkest periods of our lives.
And that empathy is that's a notion that I've also struggled with mightily. And I think a lot of progress has been made within my life of tackling that in those observations of my younger self. So, and also of myself, of, you know, coming out of university and, you know, moving up to Michigan and just engaging in not healthy activities every single day, not making any progress. I still struggle with looking upon that with disdain and disgust. But over time, I've been able to not only enact some empathy upon what that time meant, but also just forgiving myself for being in that position in the first place. Like forgiving myself for that even being allowed to happen. Like I would sit there because of course with the judgment comes the sentence. And the sentence is living my life, placing that time in my life, you know, behind bars and just absolutely condemning it to no positive or critical analysis and observation down the road. And that's just not, that's not worth it. It's not conducive. Not going to be productive in really finding that ultimate potential in the future without ultimately understanding where you are. So I get that. And I feel that we most certainly can enact that upon more on a daily basis. So,
yeah. And I think the more I think of it, we may have to dive into this concept more on some future discussions as well. Because I really
we need to save this.
Yeah, I really like where this is going. But you know, I think it's this idea of a negative emotion cannot drive a positive spirit.
Yeah.
I don't think that can translate.
Yeah.
So if we're being driven today by the disgust and hatred we have for ourselves at our weakest moments, while we may have positive actions, we may have positive drive, our spirit will not exist in a positive place. So we have to get to a point where even if we aren't proud of those former actions of who we were, even if we aren't proud of that specific moment in life, if we can at least find what you said, forgiveness, find empathy for that person who was in so much pain. There was so much they were running from, so much they were escaping. And if we can accept that person because we know who he was going to become, I think that will allow us to open up to a maximally positive spiritual drive in that specific domain. Mm-hmm. So that's a profound practice. We'll dive into this in the future, guys. I love it.
Yeah.
And I guess to kind of start to round things out for today, I want to revisit something you brought up earlier, and that's this idea of opportunistic pathogens, which is what they're referred to as in the practice of medicine. And it's these pathogens that exist all the time, whether in the environment or sometimes even in your own body. And normally, under normal, healthy, regular operations of the human body, they cannot cause an issue. They're so insignificant that they cannot cause disruption in the incredible, impossible structure that is the human body. But they're always there, always waiting for their opportunity to overtake you and cause significant harm and significant struggle. Anybody who's ever battled through cancer is familiar with this, because we have to knock back the immune system to such a level that it creates an opportunity for these pathogens to rise to the surface and actually overcome the body's defenses because it's been so weakened. If you've ever been on cancer therapy, you've probably taken Bactrim before on the weekends to fight off pneumocystis cerevisiae pneumonia, which is an opportunistic pathogen that generally only people with severely weakened and compromised immune systems have to worry about. If you've ever been on cancer therapy or heavy antibiotic therapy, you might have battled with something called Clostridium difficile, or C. diff as it's more commonly known. Mm-hmm. Causes horrendous
that darn
GI issues. And these are opportunistic pathogens that can only wreak havoc on the body when the body is weakened. And I think we can look at things like comfort and like pleasure in almost kind of a similar lens. Not that comfort and pleasure are bad. We never want that to be the message that comes across. But it's something that we have to control. It's like it's like we heard our guy Gordon Ramsay in the masterclass we were taking from him the other day discuss. You have to use. He was specifically talking about rosemary, and it was talking about a lot of herbs. But when he was talking about rosemary, he was talking about how you use it. You never cut it. You never crush it. You never dry it. You never bruise it, is what he referred to it as. He was talking about taking a leg of lamb and cooking it in the oven to almost near perfection, and then throwing the raw, freshly picked rosemary on right at the last possible moment to enhance the aroma, to enhance the flavor, to complete the entire picture of all the work you just put in. I think we can look at comfort and pleasure as a lot of the same way. Mm. To use it to enhance the purpose-driven life you're leading, and not making comfort the purpose in and of itself. Because comfort can be this wonderful, beautiful thing when used appropriately. But just like in a leg of lamb dish, if rosemary became the entire point of that dish, you would lose the entire meaning and purpose of the dish.
Yeah, and that's not going to be good.
No.
Not going to be delicious.
Not at all. Not at all. And similarly to opportunistic pathogens, comfort can be a beautiful thing when we control it, when we sprinkle it in as it's intended. But when we allow it to become the entire point and meaning and purpose of our lives, then it becomes a pathogen waiting for its opportunity to overtake your life. And the antidote to that is through your own potential, finding a life dedicated to your highest potential in whatever pursuit it is you're most passionate about. Because when you find your highest potential, you create that impossible version of yourself capable of achieving that potential. And then you take that one step further and give it to the world. You will find a level of purpose, a level of meaning, and a level of happiness, the likes of which you will have never known before. And it will drive you into the next mission and the next mission after that. And living life in this kind of cyclical manner will allow you to become stronger and stronger and more disciplined, and not sliding into those darker places devoid of purpose, seeking only pleasure and comfort as an escape. So don't let yourself become betrayed by your own comfort, and keep yourself tied to a mission that fuels your life.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Anything else to add today to brother?
No, we'll continue this on a later date.
Absolutely. We'll keep diving into these concepts for you guys. And if you guys liked today's discussion, if you want to actually take it one step farther and become a part of this discussion, we would be honored to have you guys join us on our new online school community platform. This is nothing like this has ever really been created before, but it's already been such an incredibly enriching part of the experience of not just this podcast, but everything we are doing on this mission for Impossible Performance. It's our biggest step we've taken to date in building the vision for Impossible Performance, which is to create that global culture of strength we discuss in every episode. You guys as podcast listeners will get early access to episodes. You'll get private Q&As with a lot of our guests, and you'll even have the opportunity to submit questions for our guests before we even record the episode. So in that way, you actually literally become a part of the podcast discussion. And it's been a really cool aspect. Beyond that, we have discussion boards where we talk about all of these concepts in depth with each other. And we also look at, different quotes, different thoughts, all of the impossible things we're all pursuing in our day-to-day lives. And it would be, we're looking to grow this platform as much as humanly possible. So we would be honored to have you guys join us and continue this discussion off camera and off mic and as one cohesive group, all dedicated to a pursuit of the impossible. So the link is below in the comments if you guys would like to hop on there and join us on that community and continue this discussion. Beyond all that, the number one thing we ask for you guys is if this conversation impacted you in some way today, which we absolutely know it did, please share it with as many people as you possibly can. If you look on your YouTube screen below the video screen, there's a share button. I want you to click that share button. A little pop-up will come up to say copy link. I want you to copy that link. If you're on your phone, if you're on a web browser, just simply copy the URL at the top of the whatever web browser you're using. Copy it, paste it into a message, and send it to as many people as you know who you think it would benefit, because that's ultimately what helps us realize our main vision at Impossible Performance. It's how we spread this mission and this mindset and this message that we have, not just for ourselves in our own daily lives, but for the entire world. Because at Impossible Performance, we are striving to build a global culture of strength, fostering a spirit of growth in constant pursuit of the impossible. Thank you guys for listening, and as always, be impossible.